the teacher was like, you need to go take care of your son. Like, sorry. And I mean, his son would have been okay, but he's like, you have to go be a father and raise your son, even if he would be fine materially. And so this man returned, and after he'd like put that doubt to rest and just been like, all right, I can't be a monk, so I might as well be a really, really good dad. Um, his son became his whole realm of practice, and he's more monastic than most monastics I know. Like he lives this unbelievably simple life. He's so restrained. And so I just think it's a good reflection for people is like, for me, the form was right, but if it's not right for you, put to rest that niggling doubt about ordaining or not, and just find a way to live the Dharma in your life now. And don't believe the narrative in your head that you can't progress very quickly on the path where you are. So just some thoughts. Yeah.
Thing, how you got this Buddhist attire? What was that thing which made you feel like living up more of the world and getting ahead in this spiritual journey of yours?
Good question. My parents were kind of Buddhist, what we call Buddhist sympathizers, sort of Buddhist light. So they practiced a bit of meditation, listened to teachings every now and again when I was a kid. But when I was about 15, I read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, which is a really, famous book. Most people have read it, or a lot of people have. And it's not actually a terribly Buddhist book at its heart, what the narrative actually goes through, but the image of the Buddha in it was the first image I'd ever kind of been given of a monk and what that could be. And it was really moving to me. The idea that someone could very explicitly dedicate their whole lives to the cultivation of the pure heart in that way. And so I began to meditate after I read that when I was about 15 daily, and the practice just became more and more central to my life. And I kept upping the times. I think there are really discrete sea changes in life that happens when someone begins to meditate for about 20 minutes a day, then about 45 minutes a day. And then I think there's another kind of change around an hour and a half a day, about 2 45-minute sessions or so, where people can really notice something happening at each of those kind of landmark moments. And certainly I did. So, went through college in, meditating quite a lot, and it was more and more central to my life. And I also was more and more unable to really feel like the life I was living was worthy of my death, in the sense of it just felt dilute. And I think that's how most of us lose. I mean, that's the great tragedy of modernity for a lot of, the middle class, I suppose, is not so much this, these dire moments of suffering, but rather just kind of a steady loss of our purpose, insidious and like slow. And so that's what I had noticed, is like I was doing good things, but none of them felt kind of like enough. And so I started, after I nearly quit when I was in junior year of college to go off and try out robes, but it didn't. People convinced me to stick around and finish up my degree. And then I was looking into grad schools on the way after college, driving down the California coast, and I stopped in at Abhayagiri, which is a monastery we have near, or that exists just north of San Francisco, about 2 hours. And I just stopped by there, but within about a half an hour, it was so obvious to me. I mean, I'd just come off of 12 hours of driving, listening to top 40 radio and podcasts, stopping at Taco Bell, reading the new Hunger Games, pretty much anything to distract me from something. And when I stepped into the monastery and just that silence, it was so clear that I really needed a container. I don't think everyone's going to be a monastic,
Mhm.
and yet for me, it was so obviously a fruitful direction. And so then things just changed from there. I gave up my kind of grad school aspirations. I went to a monastery, a Tibetan one actually, near where I grew up in Spokane, called Sravasti, and was there for a month. But the Tibetan lineage has been turning out enlightened beings for 2.5 millennia or 2 millennia. But and there's a lot of power there, but I was just always so attracted to the Theravada articulation, and particularly to Ajahn Chah's form that he set down in the Thai forest form, where there's this very like strict adherence to the original code, um, and the clarity of the Pali Suttas, the simplicity of breath meditation. So I was there for a month at that Tibetan abbey, but although it firmed up my aspirations for monasticism, it didn't seem like the place for me. So I traveled to Thailand, and within a few days of being there, I just felt so at home in that tradition, and I ordained with a monk named Ajahn Anan, who was a disciple of Ajahn Chah. And it just felt like falling in love, like sort of, I think a lot of practitioners have this experience of encountering the Dharma and the form, and just it feels like a footprint that was meant for you. And there's a real power to this form in the sense of we aren't allowed to use money, and this lineage actually holds that. A lot of Buddhist orders, it just hasn't always been kept, and currently is kept quite rarely, I'd say, in the Buddhist world, because the idea is that it shouldn't work. It couldn't work in the modern age. And I understand why there's that view, because logically, as monks, we aren't allowed to use money. We can't ask for things except for water unless we're invited or ill.
Yeah.
We can't store food, so we have to go for alms to the city every day, and just sort of wait there. And we can't really beg. We just have to be present, looking like we do, and see if people approach us on their own. And I understand people's skepticism that could exist, especially in the West today. But the magic is it does, and it works. And the beauty that form brings about in terms of an ethic of surrender, of real simplicity, and of faith are palpable. And so as soon as I kind of stepped into that form and saw its potency, I was pretty moved. And coming to the West, it's just proven to be. I came about 2 years ago to the West, but then I came to Seattle and began Clear Mountain, which we can talk about at some point, or helped begin this project. And this ethic of surrender really, it doesn't fail. And it's more insecure, but every morning I have to go for alms in downtown Seattle, in Pike Place, near the first Starbucks. So I just go there and I wait for about 30 minutes. And the first day I waited there, like 7 people just spontaneously came up and offered food. And and just this real faith that the Dharma will care for you. Or like you said, when you seek something, something will seek you. Or as they say in Thai, like if you protect the Dhamma protects you.
Yeah.
And I just think it's beautiful. But I think that the most meaningful thing the Dharma has given me, and what these robes indicate, hopefully someday that's awakening, but for now it's a real purpose. And the robes have provided that container and symbol, and the props are important. So I like the attire. Yes. It's a long answer.
And like it's making me feeling spiritually elevated. So I can say that the book by Harmony Siddhartha just worked as something which hit you in your head, like just wake up, you need to go up finding the truth. It's where your root lies. So like most of the, like when I hear philosophers and monks saying that when they take up monkhood, what they're seeking can be found even in like living in a materialistic world, but not letting that materialism live in you. So, like, what's your take on that?
I think you can find it. Certainly there are tales in the suttas of, people attaining awakening, or people existing in the first 3 stages of awakening as lay people. Although it seems that when one attains full awakening, at least canonically, there's just not people don't really want to stay in the householder life anymore, and they'll adopt some renunciant form, just because the spirit is in a different place completely. And yet I know a lot of lay people who live and practice better than some monks I know. I really think it comes down to one's path and karma and inclination, and just not everyone's going to be a monastic. And if one feels called to that, and I think this is really important, is for people to touch into monasteries. And even if you aren't called to monasticism, there's such power in living within the form of a monastery for a time with monks and nuns. But some people, if you feel called to that, then that's great. I did need the container, and it felt like the proper form for me. I think a really relevant reflection for lay people is often that decision point of renouncing the world and ordaining or not becomes this ghost decision that follows people their whole lives, or tantalizes them, or they always wonder, maybe I could ordain, and it's always in the back of their minds. And that's a nice thing to have there. But for some people, it becomes this constant hook where they think they've not lived up to their true, potential in life because they didn't ordain. And maybe they didn't have the option. Maybe they had a kid, maybe they have debt, or maybe it's just not in their hearts and at the moment, completely. And I think for most people in that situation, a really good reflection is like, if you have come to the conclusion that for now, the lay life is the proper course for you, not to just really turn towards it as your form of practice, and like you said, this materialistic world, like, use that as your vehicle. And, the marriage, the child, like, you can find so much dharma there, and the metric of the heart is not predicated on monastery or not. And I just, we had one practitioner here who, he had a son and he had strong aspirations for robes. So he went to some monasteries and asked if he could ordain. And then the teacher was like, you need to go take care of your son. Like, sorry. And his son would have been okay, but he's like, you have to go be a father and raise your son, even if he would be fine materially. And so this man returned, and after he'd like put that doubt to rest and just been like, all right, I can't be a monk, so I might as well be a really, really good dad. His son became his whole realm of practice, and he's more monastic than most monastics I know. Like, he lives this unbelievably simple life. He's so restrained. And so I just think it's a good reflection for people, is like, for me, the form was right, but if it's not right for you, put to rest that niggling doubt about ordaining or not, and just find a way to live the Dharma in your life now. And don't believe the narrative in your head that you can't progress very quickly on the path where you are. So just some thoughts. Yeah.
See, the most important thing is that you should have love for the beings around you, either you live in the monastic area or at the home. The thing is, you can even meditate at the home and find and walk on the route the
Mm,
way monks do.
mm,
Like there's a very prominent Vietnamese monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, who says
mm.
that everyone is a Buddha. Sometimes the mode is on, sometimes it's off.
That's good. The mode is on and off. I like that.
So Buddha means the one who is awakened.
Mm,
So why do he says that we all are awakened? He says that sometimes you sleep, sometimes you're awakened, and like you're just revolving. You're not fully awake.
mm. Yeah, this is a good question. It's interesting, like monks and the Buddha himself did use verse at times, and these are poetic phrases in a lot of ways. Uh, and in the sense, the third noble truth is the realization of peace and of cessation, and that's something. The fact that it's in that framework of the Four Noble Truths of, this, but just for the listeners, comprehending suffering is the task of the first noble truth, like looking at it, understanding it, comprehending it. Letting go of its cause, craving, is the second. The third noble truth is realizing cessation of that suffering, which is peace. And the fourth is developing the path to that cessation, the Noble Eightfold Path. So the fact that that third noble truth is in there, and we just apply these framework again and again, getting a deeper and deeper insight. It's an applied skill. You don't just hear the noble truths, as and suddenly have access to their full breadth. You have to become skilled in seeing in that framework. And if one saw truly all things with those completely developed, you would attain awakening in that moment. I mean, they're so powerful. Really seeing the depth of dukkha or its subtlety, letting go of its craving completely, etc. But like you said, that's the ultimate. And in the meantime, we're at this evolving staircase, and each step of that stair is a new refinement of those Four Noble Truths vision of one's life and activities and marriage. And so, yeah, the fact that one can experience the third noble truth in any moment, that is an awakening, that is a moment of being awake. And Buddha does mean awake. So in that sense, I understand what Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh is saying. But yeah, also like those teachings are dangerous a bit. They can be held wrong because
Yeah, absolutely.
it definitely, it has, like in certain traditions, like there has been this idea of like, oh, we're all awake, and enlightenment and samsara are one and the same. And I understand what they're pointing to, like don't look far afield for awakening, practice where you
Yeah.
are,
See, there are a lot
develop
of
a knowing mind.
contradictions when you're talking about this meditation and realization and stuff. And in India itself, there are few traditions which believe that there is a spirit and that is the ultimate reality you want to know. Buddhists believe that there's a soul?
I mean, anatta, not self, which is the teaching of the Buddha. So in the sense of an Atman or a concrete self, no, certainly not. In
So
terms of a continuity
when
of consciousness, then yes. Mm-hmm.
so how is consciousness like different from soul? And the second thing, when we are saying that we are awake, in some like some of the saints of and sages of a country say that you are awake in the sense that your spirit is there. You just need to understand that you are conscious about that spirit which lies in you, and that is something which is true.
Mm.
So yeah.
Yes, no, good, big question. So it's a good question. It's the question, really. Um, the Buddha was clear that there was a transcendent element, or a transcendent reality, and that was nibbana. And that is timeless and distinct from the samsaric cycle we find ourselves in. He was also clear that it's not a self, in the sense that it's not under our control, or not. As soon as we identify with something, we lose access to, we cut ourselves off from nibbana. he did say we could awaken to it. So in that sense, you know, if that's defined as being awake, then yeah, I guess we're already awake because we could awaken. But I think that's a silly definition, you know, because it kind of like it just it short circuits all the teachings. And there's a moment when that can happen, like at awakening, I'm sure, where everything kind of implodes. The Buddha said as much, but most of us just aren't there. And as to the, you know, he also was clear that there is a continuity of karma that, you know, carries from body to body and life to life. And people often wonder, like, how can karma move if there's no self? You know, what carries it? And that's getting it backwards, because that's assuming karma in the context of self. Like a self moves and karma kind of follows it. But in the Buddhist thought, it's self happens in the context of karma. Karma is the broader thing, in the sense like there's a continuity of patterning and habit. And one of those patterns and habits is the habit of making and feeling the sense of self. That's one more habit pattern. So yeah, that's the concrete feeling of self. But then it does get weird when you start talking about, like, you know, is there, language implodes a bit at a certain point. And, you know, I think some of those great teachers in various traditions were pointing to something most likely very similar, if not identical. You know, like there's certainly teachers in the Christian tradition who, Buddhist teachers such as Ajahn Pasanno have said probably attained some level of awakening, like Meister Eckhart. And I'm sure they'd say the same of some yogic practitioners or stuff. But it just becomes so hard to, you know, speak about.
Have you heard about Shankaracharya, the Upanishads and stuff?
No, would you tell me about him?
Yeah, so like he's one of the most well-read and well-read literates who have been talking about yoga and everything. So he has a compilation of books known as Upanishads, the highest stream of knowledge which has been present, like, as most of
the
the people say.
Upanishads I do know of, yes, but go on. I didn't. Okay, so he's the
He's the one who compiled the Upanishads. Shankaracharya. So he states that like he has some of its Mahavakyas like Aham Brahmasmi, Tattvamasi, that I am the supreme and you are too. So he's in a capsule he's talking about Advait, and Advait means, like, it translates to non-duality. So when Buddha is saying that, can we connect it to, like, it's the consciousness and you are the consciousness, you're not separated.
You know, it's pretty interesting. Like, this is where it gets hard. Because the Buddha actually, there's a sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 32 or 36, anyways, near there in the Samyutta Nikaya, where this is really relevant, where the Buddha basically talks about all the ways we assume self in the khandhas, the five aggregates. And yeah, he goes through the ones, you know, like you consider the body to be form, the self is the body, the self is owning the body, the body is in self, etc. But then he adds on these, and he's like, this is a view, it's constructed, it's changeable. But then he goes through, after he's done that with every one of the aggregates, you know, saying like all these ways of identifying with these aggregates are a constructed identification and not ultimate reality. He then says the view, you know, there is nothing, that's a constructed view, and the view, the self of mine is eternal, boundless, you know, and will continue as long as eternity. That's also a constructed self. Or one has the view, one remains in doubt around all these things, and that's a constructed view. So, you know, it's funny because, like, one of the pitfalls, I see his brutality in this ethic of, like, let go, let go, let go, as pretty unique, because what he saw is, like, when you encounter those bright mind states, it's so hard not to take them as God. I mean, and he saw his teachers get hung up on that, like Venerable Uddaka Ramaputta and And Alara Kalama, they both got to these formless attainments and they thought they'd reached the ultimate. And I think the Buddha saw the danger of that happening and of applying any reifying framework where people could use it to grasp that and make it into a self and keep themselves from full awakening, that he just ripped the carpet out completely. So, maybe some of these teachers were encountering something similar, but I think there's a good chance that they didn't, because, but who knows, but what I can say is the Buddha, his teaching's unique in that he tries to, he's really wary of that thing where you say, oh, I'm this ultimate self. And he said, as soon as there's that notion of self and of identification, you've lost the plot. Just keep letting go. So yeah, I see it as unique. I see it as unique.
Like everybody having their separate definitions. There's a Chinese proverb that there are more than one ways to the top of the mountain. So maybe they will have their eclectic languages and definitions of the realization. And plus, the only way we can understand this clearly out of the bookish wisdom is to amplify and meditate on, and walk on that path to get what's real and what's real.
Yeah, and I think, when the Dalai Lama was asked what the best religion is, he said, yours. And I think Buddhism is the most comprehensive. He said both. And for me, obviously I'm biased. I do love the Buddha's teaching. But I think his admonition of follow what speaks to you, as long as it's in line with these kind of eightfold noble path of non-harming and cultivation. But just I think these routes do go up the mountain. I think, there is a danger in conflating all the religions, because we have a tendency, we want to do that and sort of say, oh, it's all the same. And, there are meaningful distinctions, but I also agree that I think if people have a path that really speaks to them and they follow it, that can take someone so quickly. And I know Christians who are practicing far better than a lot of Buddhists I know, it's not, even if at that top of the mountain, there becomes some plateaus and false summits, that you have to kind of scramble up from tradition to tradition. I think you're right that most traditions for most of that mountain are, Ajahn Chah said, religions are cars heading in the same direction. So, I really agree with what you said around really honoring people's paths. And I think we can do that while also acknowledging distinctions in the different teachings,
The different paths, and the only thing a person needs to do is to concentrate on his path and work on that.
And it becomes hard because some of the paths, there are elements, certain religions say it is okay to kill animals, and I don't know if I'd feel comfortable saying it is. I wouldn't, and so from my perspective, I think sort of checking one's path against really refined traditions and checking in with the why.
There has to be certain sense of consciousnness and awareness when you are trying to pick up a guru or a path. There's an Indian poet, a philosophic poet, Kabir Das. Would you have you heard about him?
No, but go on. What is it?
Certainly about 500 years ago, he was the only man when there were numberless conflicts and tribulations, and when religion had made a chaos, when there were Hindus, there were Muslims who were fighting in the country on the ghats, and then a person comes up and says I am none, I'm neither this or that, I don't believe in penance, I don't do the yoga, I don't believe in statues, neither I believe in the silence, I believe in nothingness. So when these kind of people come and they strike up the head of these Muslims and Hindus who are very conditioned to their thoughts, he works as a spear. A spear is gonna kill your ego or the boast, which you are finding as the self.
Yeah, I think the mystics of many traditions have done exactly that. You're right. That's where they they've merged things, or that's where the traditions meet so often.
And like one more thing I want to just like ask you. You had a certain sense of like videos going through your YouTube channel. I saw some of those. Can you explain us about what do like the joy of missing out means?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we did a retreat called Joy of Missing Out. You might know this English term, fear of missing out, which is
Mhm.
abbreviated as FOMO. So people will be
Yeah,
like, "Ah, I gotta go,"
it's
the
a very
FOMO.
famous term right now.
Yeah,
Many
good. I'm glad
places.
it's made its way everywhere. Then so JOMO was just a joy of missing out, was a way of turning that on its head. And um yeah, I just think it's a term many of us practitioners really
Hmm.
come to understand more and more, is just so much. The Buddha says that, like, what the world considers happiness, the noble ones consider suffering. What the world considers true, the noble ones consider false. What the noble ones consider true, the world considers false. What the noble ones consider happiness, the world considers suffering. And you see your vision shift as you practice, to the point
Hmm.
where, like, what you used to consider as happiness no longer seems attractive, going out to the party and stuff. And you just kind of like getting seclusion a bit and missing out on those things, and so it was just kind of a tongue-in-cheek way of looking at that. We based it around this four sources of clinging, just to have a good Buddhist framework in the picture. But the gist of the title was that it's actually very interesting, because in the teachings, these terms sukha, happiness, and dukkha, suffering, there's a few suttas where the Buddha gives an intentionally circular definition of dukkha, of suffering. Like, he says, basically, wherever one finds sukha, that the Buddha defines as sukha. And then he, like, goes through this ascending order of, like, first jhana is sukha, second jhana is sukha, and in the end, nibbana is sukha, happiness. And what I see that as him pointing to is, like, dukkha, suffering, and sukha, pleasure, are changeable terms we apply in these moments of experience, and they
Hmm.
refine as we practice. And it's so cool that he gives that intentionally circular
We can also
definition.
like circulate that sukh or that sukha at some elevated level as like nothingness when he's feeling nothing, but we can call it that.
Yeah, well, he does identify with equanimity, and then with nibbana. And it's just so cool, because he acknowledges that it changes for us as we practice. And what sukha, for when you're beginning practice, is like going out with friends to a club, is dukkha later on in practice. And I just think it's such
Yeah.
a brilliant move of logic for him to give those circular definitions of those two terms. It's like they're the rungs of a ladder, and as soon as you let go of this rung, dukkha, and reach up to a new sukha, you realize that this rung, which you formerly thought was sukha, is actually dukkha, and you let go and you do it again. So
There has been a very controversial spiritual leader called Osho. He had,
I've heard of him, or her, or them.
yeah, him. And the most controversial man I know personally also. Like, he was a very, not materialistically inside. I listen to his discourses, I read his books. They are very like highly spiritual and elevated. He talks about Buddha, he talks about his teachings too. He's a very eclectic type of person. He jumps
Mm.
into like from tradition to tradition. There would have been no tradition or a religion or belief would have
Mm.
left by like his speaking. He had more than like
Do you know what he's
70
grounded? Do you know what his, like, root tradition is, or is he kind of all of them mixed together?
mixed together. Like he's talking
Mm.
about Islam, Buddhist, he's talking about Tao, Zen, about the starting to the end, he's taking up everything.
Mm.
So at one side, he's living up that his materialistic life, not that materialistic, like he took up his monkhood when he was small. Then he says that I got enlightened on this and this date, and he
Mm.
opened up his ashram. He had his own city known as Rajneeshpuram, made up in America.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
He had some 70, 80 Rolls Royces. He had everything, a lavish life.
Oh yeah, I know him. I know of him. I lived near his former
He's a
community.
great person. Personally, when I read him, when I listen to him, I feel good. I feel that there's a certain sense of knowledge and wisdom which can be found reading him. The one thing he says that when some lama or when I approached a monk few days back, I said him that Dalai Lama wears a Rolex in his hand, and should he be attached to these things? Like the first reply I got was, "How do you know that he's attached to his Rolex?" The only conclusion we draw is that you can live wherever you want, but not letting the darkness live in you. You have to it's obvious to live in darkness. You always cannot say that, yeah, I have everything, but from inside you should feel that contentment. And from where, would you be able to connect the joy of missing out with attachments, not attaching to anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the essence of it. Yeah, is renunciation, we call it, or nekama, which is just simplicity, and a real cleanliness of spirit. But I just also think it is so easy to bandy around the idea of kind of, having that many Rolls Royces and still, having attainment, and perhaps he did. But I think, regardless of where certain teachers are at, just for us as practitioners, there is a narrative that gets kind of put around, I'm living in the gutter to lift other beings out of the gutter. And it just doesn't work that well. We are very sick, and we need containers and some clear lines, and add, encouragement to simplify and to give. So I think, the joy of missing out, it is about giving those things up. We can not attach to things while being in the midst of them, but that's a pretty tall order for a lot of us. So I think to some extent, there are certain things that one just is damaging, like alcohol and drugs, no matter what. But other things, I just think, we definitely have to work with that aspect of renunciation in an external way as well. Yeah. But
So
I think it's a good point. I haven't read Osho. I'm curious.
Yeah. And seriously, at the moment, I'm feeling very contented. I have nothing to say about that. Missing out or something. Talking to you, you was very blissful. It got me a lot of things to learn. I'm thankful and grateful to you again for bringing out on the panel and sharing your wisdom. Thank you.
Shreyans, and Namotana for what you're doing. That's Monk for way to go. And it's such a gift to have people who are really interested and passionate, and
it will keep us driving, sir, and it really motivates me to do other good stuff too. Thank you.
Great. Good luck. See you.